So in this video, I want to discuss with you the role of professors in a business school. And to start with, why is it useful to know that in terms of career development and professionalism? Well, one, you'll spend a lot of time in your business school program relating to your professors. It's good to know something about them if you want to in some way endear yourself to them or to have a professional student-professor relationship. It's good to better understand what their role is within the system. So that being said, there are numerous designations or types of professor. Okay, to start with, there's the adjunct professor, who's a part-time person, generally an industry professional who comes in and teaches one class. They're not oftentimes generally not a full-time employee of the school. Okay, they just come in for that one semester and they reapply each semester for that type of position. They may teach 1, 2, or 3 classes depending, but generally they don't have as much connection to the operations and of the school as these other professors we'll talk about. Then we'll talk about the full-time professor. Okay. So that's their primary job. That's oftentimes all that they do, right? And they generally come with various degrees of designation that's tied to years of service, qualifications, that type of thing. So an instructor or lecturer tends to be someone who may not have their terminal degree, which may be required by the institution, okay? Or it may be someone with a terminal degree who does not want to pursue the track of a researching professor or doing the research functions that are commonly required of professors in a business school. Okay, so your instructors or lecturers generally don't have that research requirement. Their primary focus is on teaching. Okay, that being said, oftentimes schools don't just have the instructor or lecturer grouping. They have as well professors in the practice that will be associate, assistant, or full professors, just like the researching professors. It's just, once again, they're more industry professionals focused more on teaching. So oftentimes in those universities that has the dichotomy between in the practice and researching professors, if you have a lecturer, it's generally someone who doesn't have a terminal degree in their field and wouldn't qualify to be an assistant professor in the practice. So you'll see a lecturer or senior lecturer type thing, and they'll teach 3 or 4 classes, and that's their primarily only responsibility. There's little to no research requirement associated there. An instructor, once again, may not meet the requirements, but an instructor is generally the step before assistant professor. So we'll talk now about that. So the traditional tiers of professor is assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. So assistant professor is generally someone in their first 5 or 6 years of employment at the school will be an assistant professor. Okay, at the end of that 5 or 6 year period is when they can seek promotion to associate professor. Generally, they're judged on their duties, their performance, and as you'll see here on the slide, the duties are their research, which is the primary consideration, their teaching, that is student evaluations and quality of teaching, that type of thing, advising or student engagement, the extent to which they have interacted with and supported the student body or individual students in their learning or career paths. And then service to the school, institution, and academy. And that can be things like being reviewers for journals, being officers in organization, taking part of putting on conference presentations, that type of thing. Within the school, it may be serving, or within the entire university, it may be serving on committees or being on task force or taking part in school planning functions, that type of thing. So taking all those duties together, those are the things that you'll be evaluated on when going from assistant to associate professor and associate professor to full professor. If you are a mixed bag and you're at a small mid-sized school that doesn't have the dichotomy between teaching professor or professor in the practice and researching professor, you're generally going to have a mixture of those. In a R1 or heavy researching university where you oftentimes do have in the practice and the researching professors, what you're going to see is promotion is more closely tied to research output alone. There's not going to be a lot of requirements for your researching professors for service to the school. It's almost everything revolves around the research. Okay, but once again, in the practice class, it's going to be the exact opposite. It's going to be some aspects of research, practitioner-based stuff, teaching and learning type stuff, but most of their focus is going to be on student engagement, that type of thing, teaching evaluations, etc. So just understand that one of the first things you want to determine, adjunct versus full-time. If they're full-time, are we talking lecturer instructor? Or are we talking about assistant, associate, or full? If you're talking assistant, associate, or full, are you talking about an in-the-practice group, or are you talking about a researching professor group? And then some other things you'll see is emeritus. That's usually someone who served for a long period of time and they have an honorary role as professor in the university, even into retirement. Okay, a visiting professor is someone there for a short period of time, usually 1 to 3 years type scenario, and they're there to do research at the university and potentially move on to another university. So it's somewhat of a career development in training type position at the school. Okay, and then you'll see an in-residence person oftentimes, and that's someone who's just, again, visiting for a specific period of time, or they may not be completely in academia, but they're taking that step over and they're a practitioner or a professor in residence in the school, and they'll teach courses in specific skill sets or topics related to their professional practice. And then fellowships, which are for PhD students who they may be in that school and they may be from other schools, but they basically have a research grant or an opportunity to do research using the resources of the school. Okay, oftentimes they're on a paid fellowship where they can get paid as well to assist in teaching and things like that as well. Okay, so it'll be tied in with graduate teaching responsibilities, right? Okay, so that's the general things you should determine or should know about professors. But one thing that I oftentimes see is highly misunderstood is the responsibilities of the professor, and the idea that the whole researching class of professors that are generally compensated far more than the other classes or groups of professors. That's the primary objectives of the school, particularly your larger R1 institutions. They focus very heavily on knowledge creation and generation of the next level of knowledge in a given field through these professors supervising the PhD programs and the individual PhD students in developing their dissertations and the research dissemination that goes along with that. Okay, so once again, researching versus into practice, lecturer / instructor, some of the other designations. One final thing is tenured and chaired professors. Tenured means that your research is of such a quality that you've been granted assurance of a position for the remainder of your life at the school, or the remainder of your career at the school. That is, generally, it's not 100% you can't get fired, but your research is such that you're not going to be called to task or questioned on the quality of your research output from then on type thing. So it's a level of assurance in your job or position. Again, related almost entirely to research output. Normally, an assistant professor coming into the school will come up for third-year review to determine whether they're on track to meet their requirements for promotion and eventually tenure type thing. And if they are within the next couple of years based on their research output, they will apply for tenure. If they're not granted tenure, oftentimes you leave the university, or if you don't meet your third-year review, you leave the university and go somewhere else, perhaps not to a researching university, more of a teaching type school. You'll see, which are normally your regional schools, oftentimes your smaller state system schools or your smaller private schools, not what we call your R1 institutions, your well-known private institutions, or your larger state-funded institution. And then a chaired position is when someone is donated a significant fund of money that is now endowed for that position, and it pays, in addition to the professor's salary from the school, it pays a portion extra to that professor for their salary. it surprises people to learn that a professor may make a business school professor may make $100,000 a year for their full-time service, but their chaired status as a researcher will bring in anywhere from $100,000 to $700,000 or $800,000 a year in addition to that salary. The highest compensated business professors in the United States make between $500,000 and $1 million a year for their service to the school, and most of that comes from an endowment to chair that position. So these are highly accomplished researchers who are very preeminent in their field, right? But that's the way their positions are funded in that regard. Okay, so taken together, now you understand basically the structure and how it works within a business school, the role, rank, title, etc. of professors.